Hello and welcome to part 4 of our Winter's Tale, The Hunter's Wife by Anthony Doerr. She heard the otherworldly screams of wounded coyotes come up through the floorboards, his grunts and curses as he fought. It sounded as if an exit had been tunnelled all the way from hell to open under their house, and what was now pouring out was the worst violence that place could send up. She knelt in front of the fireplace and felt the souls of coyotes as they came through the boards on their way skyward. He was blood-soaked and hungry, and his thigh had been badly bitten, but he worked all day digging out the truck. If he did not get food, they would starve, and he tried to hold the thought of the truck in his mind. He lugged slate and tree bark to wedge under the tyres, excavated a mountain of snow from the truck bed. Finally, after dark, he got the engine turned over and ramped the truck up onto the frozen, wind-crusted snow. For a brief, wonderful moment, he had it careening over the icy crust, starlight washing through the windows, tyres spinning, pistons churning, what looked to be the road unspooling in the headlights. Then he crashed through. Slowly, painfully, he began digging it out again. It was hopeless. He would get it up, and then they would break through a few miles later. Hardly anywhere was the sheet of ice atop the snow thick enough to support the truck's weight. For 20 hours he dug and then revved and slid the truck over 8-foot drifts. 3 more times it crashed through and sank to the windows. Finally he left it. He was 10 miles from home, 30 miles from town. He made a weak and smoky fire with cut boughs and lay beside it and tried to sleep, but he couldn't. The heat from the fire melted snow, and trickles ran slowly towards him, but froze solid as they reached him. The stars, twisting in their constellations above, had never seemed further or older. In a state that was neither fully asleep nor fully waking, he watched wolves lope around his fire, just outside the reaches of light, slavering and lean. He thought for the first time that he might die if he did not get warmer. He managed to kneel and turn the crawl for home. Around him, he could feel the wolves, smell blood on them, hear their nailed feet scrape across the ice. He travelled all that night and all the next day, near Catatonia, sometimes on his feet, more often though on his knees and elbows. At times he thought he was the wolf, and at times he thought he was dead. When he finally made it to the cabin, there were no tracks on the porch, no sign that she had gone out. The crawlspace door was still flung open, and shreds of the siding and the door frame lay scattered about. She was kneeling on the floor, ice in her hair, lost in some kind of hypothermic torpor. With his last dregs of energy, he constructed a fire and poured a mug of hot water down her throat. As he fell into sleep, he watched himself from a distance, weeping and clutching his near-frozen wife. They only had flour and a few crackers in the cupboards. When she could speak, her voice was quiet and far away. "I have dreamt the most amazing things," she said. "I have seen the places where coyotes go when they are gone. I know where spiders go, and geese." Snow fell incessantly. Night was abiding. Daylight passed in a breath. The hunter was beyond hungry. Whenever he stood up, his eyesight fled into snow. Slow, nauseating streaks of colour everywhere. He went out with lanterns to fish, shovelled down to the river ice, chopped through it with a maul, and shivered over the hole, jigging a ball of dough on a hook. Sometimes he brought back a trout. Other times they ate a squirrel, a hare, once a famished deer whose bones he cracked and boiled, or only a handful of rose hips. In the worst parts of March, he dug out cattails to peel and steam the tubers. She hardly ate, sleeping 18, 20 hours a day. When she did wake, It was to scribble on notebook paper before plummeting back into sleep, clutching at the blankets as if they gave her sustenance. There was, she was learning, strength hidden at the centre of weakness, ground at the bottom of the deepest pit. With her stomach empty and her body quieted, without the daily demands of living, she felt she was making important discoveries. She was only 19 and had lost 20 pounds since marrying him. Naked, she was all rib cage and pelvis. He read her scribbled dreams, but they seemed to be senseless poems and gave him no clues to her. Snail sleds down stones in the rain. Owl fixes his eyes on hare, drops as if from the moon. Horse rides across plains with his brothers. In April, the temperatures rose above 0 and then above 20. He strapped an extra battery to his pack and went out to dig the truck. Its excavation took all day. He drove it slowly back up to the slushy road in the moonlight and asked if she'd like to go to town the next morning. To his surprise, she said yes. They heated water for baths and dressed in clothes that they hadn't worn in 6 months. She threaded twine through her belt loops to keep her trousers up. Behind the wheel, his chest filled to have her with him, to be moving out into the country, to see the sun above the trees. Spring was coming. The valley was dressing up. Look there, he wanted to say, those geese streaming over the road. The valley lives, even after a winter like that. She asked him to drop her off at the library. He bought food, 12 frozen pizzas, potatoes, eggs and carrots. He nearly wept at seeing bananas. In the parking lot, he drank a half gallon of milk. When he picked her up at the library, she had applied for a card and borrowed 20 books. They stopped at the bitter root for hamburgers and rhubarb pie. She ate 3 whole pieces. He watched her eat, the spoon sliding out of her mouth. This was better. This was more like his dreams. Well, Mary, he said, I think we made it. I love pie, she said. As soon as the line was repaired, the phone began to ring. He took his fishing clients down the river. She sat on the porch, reading and reading. Soon, her sudden and ravenous appetite for books could not be met by the Great Falls Public Library. She wanted other books, essays about sorcery, primers on magic working and conjury that had to be mail-ordered from New Hampshire, New Orleans, or even Italy. Once a week, the hunter drove to town to collect a parcel of books from the post office. Arcania Mundi, the Seer's Dictionary, the Paragon of Wizardry, Occult Science Among the Ancients. He opened one to a random page and read, Bring water, tie a soft fillet around your altar, burn it on fresh twigs and frankincense. She regained her health, took on energy, and no longer lay under furs dreaming all day long. She was out of bed before he was, brewing coffee, her nose already between pages. With a steady diet of meat and vegetables, her body bloomed, her hair shone, her eyes and cheeks glowed. How beautiful she seemed to him in those few hours he was home. After supper, he would watch her read in the firelight, blackbird feathers tied through her hair, a heron's beak hanging between her breasts. In November, he took a Sunday off and they cross-country skied. They came across a bull elk frozen to death in a draw. Ravens shrieked at them as they skied it. She knelt down and put her palm on the leathered skull. There, she moaned. I feel him. What do you feel? He asked, standing beside her. What is it? She stood trembling. I feel his life flowing out, she said. I see where he goes. I see what he sees. But that's impossible, he said. It's like you saying you know what I dream. I do, she said. You dream about wolves. But that elk's been dead at least a day. It doesn't go anywhere. It goes into the crops of those ravens. How could she tell him? How could she ask him to understand such a thing? How could anyone understand? More clearly than ever, she could see that there was a fine line between dreams and wakefulness, between living and dying, a line so tenuous it sometimes didn't even exist. It was always clearest for her in winter. In that valley, life and death were not so different. The heart of the hibernating newt was frozen solid, but she could warm and wake it in her palm. For the newt there was no line at all, no fence, no river Styx, only an area between living and dying, like a snowfield between two lakes, a place where dreams and wakefulness met, where death was only a possibility and visions rose shimmering to the stars like smoke. All that was needed was a hand, the heat of a palm or the touch of her fingers. That February, the sun shone through the days and ice formed at night. Slick sheets glazing the wheat fields, the roof and the roads. One day, he dropped her off at the library, the chains of the tyres rattling as he pulled away, heading up to the Missouri towards Fort Benton. Around noon, Marilyn Spokes, a snowplough driver the Hunter knew from grade school, slid off the Sun River Bridge in his plough and dropped 40 feet to the river. He was dead before they could get him out the truck. She was reading in the library a block away and heard the plough crash into the riverbed like 1,000 dropped girders. When she got to the bridge, sprinting in her jeans and t-shirt, men were already in the water. A telephoned man from Helena, a jeweller, a butcher in his apron, all of them had scrambled down the banks and were wading in the rapids, prying the door open. The men lifted Marilyn from the cab, stumbling as they carried him. Steam rose from their shoulders and from the crushed hood of the plough. She careened down the snow-covered slope and splashed to them. Her hand on the jeweller's arm, her leg against the butcher's leg, she reached for Marilyn's ankle. When her finger touched his body, her eyes rolled back and a single vision leaped to her. Marilyn Spokes pedalling a bicycle, a child's seat mounted over the rear tyre with a helmeted boy, Marilyn's own son, strapped into it. Spangles of light drifted over the riders as they rolled down a lane beneath giant sprawling maples. The boy reached for Marilyn's hair with one small fist. In the glass of a storefront window, their reflection flashed past. Fallen leaves turned over in their wake. This quiet vision, like a ribbon of rich silk, ran out slowly and fluidly with great power, and she shook beneath it. It was she who pedalled the bike. The boy's fingers pulled through her hair. The men who were touching her or touching Marilyn saw what she saw, felt what she felt. At first, they spoke of it only in their basements and only at night. But Great Falls was not a big town, and this was not something one could keep locked in a basement. Soon they discussed it everywhere, in the supermarkets, at the gasoline pumps. People who didn't know Marilyn Spokes or his son or the hunter's wife or any of the men in the river that morning soon spoke of the event like experts. All you had to do was touch her, a barber said, and you saw it too. The most beautiful lane you've ever dreamed of, a deli owner raved. You didn't just peddle his son around, movie ushers whispered. You loved him.